What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel where I put out new photography related content almost every Monday. So if you like photography and you like this video, you can go and check out the other videos on my channel and or subscribe to get a new video almost every Monday. Today's video is coming out on Halloween, hence the Halloween costume, and we're also going to be talking about a very Halloween themed subject, which is photography as a trope in horror media. So basically how photography is used in horror and why photos have this potential to scare us so much. So I'm probably not gonna wear this whole thing the whole time, but like, I'll wear most of it. Anyway, let's jump right in. The first practical method of photography was introduced in 1839. A mere 20 years later, circa 1860, spirits began to appear in photographs. The advent of spirit photography accompanied the introduction of the glass plate negative, which allowed for double exposures. Ergo, it became possible to more easily fake spirits in photographs. The end of the American Civil War had left many dead, and in their wake, swaths of loved ones who were desperate to reconnect with the recently deceased. The spiritualist movement of the mid to late 1800s arose with this community. And at the same time, new technologies were emerging, which used electricity and various radio waves and appeared to make contact with unseen forces beyond our own realm. The X-ray, telephone, light bulb, phonograph, radar, and camera all appeared to manipulate unseeable forces and use them to affect our material reality in some way. At a time when mysterious forces were being discovered and harnessed left, right, and center, it made sense to people to think that contact with the spirit realm may also be possible with the right technology. When photographers produced photographic evidence of such contact, people were primed by decades of scientific advancement to accept this as technology rather than as deceit. And it's no stretch of the imagination to believe that a photograph can capture something that is unseeable by the human eye. After all, the recently invented X-rays did just that. And if we can peer through skin and look at bones without ever making an incision, why should it not be possible to peer across the boundaries separating our world and the next? There was money to be made in cultivating this belief that ghosts can be photographed in the public, and boy oh boy did some people make money off of it. The late 1800s were peppered with charlatans who claimed to be able to capture ghosts in photographs, and with lonely war widows who were desperate and willing to pay a pretty penny for evidence that their dearly departed husbands were still watching over them. Spirit photography proliferated, and the notion that ghosts could be photographed really made its way through the public consciousness, encouraged by salesmen adamantly insisting that this was true in order to sell spirit photographs. I pay you, you take a picture of me with my dead husband watching over me. I go home happy and comforted knowing that there's still someone out there looking out for me. And I'd really love to talk more about spirit photography, but I feel like that's an entire video on its own, so I'm gonna leave it there for now, but suffice to say that the idea that ghosts can be photographed over the years has become completely ingrained in our cultural consciousness, to the point that now anyone who believes that ghosts exist essentially also believes that they can be photographed. Photography has become inextricably entwined with the study of the paranormal, parapsychology, and with it, the creepy, eerie, and unsettling feelings we associate with such paranormal phenomenon. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about the camera, the photograph, and how these elements are used so effectively in horror media. I'm going to talk about the components of photography and their uniquely frightening attributes, as well as common tropes of how photography and photographs are used in horror. I'll be discussing all kinds of media, including short stories and urban legends, movies, TV, games, etc., because this genre of trope related to photography is so widespread across all different types of horror media. And before I really get into it, I want to say that for what it's worth, I have taken hundreds of thousands of photos in my time, and I have never captured a ghost in one. Part 1. Camera as a soul stealer. In a few cultural traditions, it is believed that an image of yourself must be some part of you, whether it's a reflection in a mirror, a painting, an effigy, or a photograph. Western superstitions about breaking mirrors being unlucky stem from this same kind of core belief, as do the ideas around what voodoo dolls are used for. Actual voodoo dolls are not used for sticking pins in and hurting people, but that's it. Go learn about that. Most cultures, almost all, maybe all, in modern times don't literally believe that taking someone's photo steals their soul, but at a time when photography had only recently emerged and a lot of people had never seen or heard of it, that belief was slightly more popular. That said, even though we know it's not literally true that taking your photo steals your soul, I think we might all still have a taste of that fear, because when I think of somebody gouging out my eyes in a photograph or burning a picture of my family, I feel uneasy about the potential superstitious repercussions of such an act. Even if I don't literally believe that violence towards the photograph will beget violence towards me and mine, I don't like it, because it feels like I'm seeing a part of myself being damaged. Somewhere in my lizard brain, I do feel like the photo of me is part of me. And that feeling is frequently capitalized on by horror media. In horror, something sinister appearing behind somebody in a picture always means that there is something sinister lurking behind that person in reality. And finding a burnt or distorted picture of oneself is always an omen of dangers to come. As interesting as this aspect of our psychological relationship to photography is, it's only one of several ways that photography makes its way into the horror genre. Consider the camera. Aside from the actual photograph, there are three components to photography that frequently recur in horror media. And these are the flash, the mirror, and the darkroom. I'll talk about the photograph in detail later on, but I thought it would be fun to talk about these three components first, to kind of lay the groundwork for why we find photographs so spooky. The flash. The flash is a quick, blindingly bright burst of light that can be used to temporarily blind or disorient an opponent. It can light up a dark room, but only for a split second, allowing you a momentary, fleeting glimpse of whatever may be lurking in the darkness. The 2013 film Mama has an excellent example of this, when a man is using a camera to look around a dark room. There's this creepy wailing sound going on, and I suppose he's looking for the source of the wailing. He's flash, flash, flash. You see nothing. It's building anticipation. You can only hear the sounds of his panicked breath, the wailing, and the gradual upward whine of the flash recharging. The flash is giving us various glimpses of the house and then plunging it back into darkness when suddenly there's something in the doorway. It's gone. More anticipation, more flashes, and then boom! Out of nowhere, a thing comes charging towards him, and I'm sure his demise was equally horrifying. Very spooky, and also a very effective device for building anticipation. There's a very similar scene in the first Saw movie when a man is working in his dark room and suddenly the power goes out and it gets a little too dark in there. He hears some weird sounds and goes to investigate and is using his flash on his camera to kind of light up the room momentarily when suddenly we see this jigsaw doll. The interesting thing about this scene is that it doesn't use music, it just uses that rising pitch sound of the flash recharging to build suspense, which I think is a really interesting parallel to those strange, distorted whining sounds we hear regularly on horror soundtracks, except the sound is native to the camera flash. And of course, this scene occurs again in Shudder, which is a horror movie based entirely off the concept of photography being scary, and also in Inside, as well as Are You Afraid of the Dark and Silent House. In Jordan Peele's flagship film, Get Out, the flash from a camera phone accidentally rouses a man from the hypnotic state that he's been placed under, causing him to jolt into wakefulness and come towards the main character and go, "Get out! Get out!" Very intense scene. But this idea that a sudden flash may have undue effects on the brain likely stems from the relationship between flashing lights and seizures in people with epilepsy. Ironically, camera flashes have also been responsible for a lot of so-called spirit photography taken in the real world, when the flash lights up dust particles and they appear as bright round dots in the final photograph, which are then interpreted as spirit orbs. Next we have the mirror. So most cameras have a little mirror inside that allows you to look through the viewfinder and see what's coming out the lens. And when you take the photo, the mirror flips up and allows light to pass through the lens, exposing the sensor or film. Which means that when you look through the viewfinder of a camera, everything you're seeing is reflected in one or more mirrors. Now, you may already know this, but mirrors are creepy as hell. They are a frequent trope used in horror media of all kinds, both real and fiction, urban legends, scary stories, and creepy ghost pictures that we find on the internet. The mirror appears in many of them, whether it's a glimpse of something in the mirror behind you being a creepy idea, or a reflection through a mirror showing you something that isn't there. In some media, an entity can only be seen in a mirror, as though the mirror itself is a gateway to another realm. I found this really great, really terrifying short horror film on YouTube called The Changing Room, in which two opposing mirrors in a changing room, creating this kind of infinity thing, seem to inadvertently create a portal to a much darker realm. It is so spooky. Oh my god, go watch it. It's in the sources. There's also the classic scene where somebody turns away from a mirror and their reflection doesn't line up with their movements. Oh my god, there's this, it's called the jaw rip scene in the film Mirrors, where a woman's in the bathroom and she walks away from her reflection and the reflection stays in the mirror and begins to rip, and the woman's jaw starts ripping off and she's in the bathtub, and oh my god. Traumatized me when I was a kid, terrified. I double checked the mirror every single time I walked away for years after I saw that. And it was just in the trailer. I didn't even see the movie. There's the children's game, Bloody Mary, which involves doing a series of hotly contested movements and incantations, spinning around in circles and things in a darkened bathroom, which apparently summons a spirit, similar to the children's game Candyman. And I think that this is maybe when a lot of us are first introduced to the terror that is our reflection. Some horror movies center mirrors entirely as their primary source of horror. Oculus, for example, is a 2013 horror film in which a demon living in an antique mirror haunts and terrorizes a family. There's also the classic mirror scare, which is definitely one of the most recurrent tropes in horror, where a mirror in a movie is used to suddenly reveal a villain or monster. Often this is like a medicine cabinet mirror, and they close it and oh my god, there's something behind them. I also want to tie that fear of the mirror in with how the viewfinder of the camera is used as a horror device as well. In the 2004 version of the photography-based horror film Shutter, a man's eyeball is ripped out when he looks through the viewfinder. In the 2017 short film Follow, a photographer in the woods is only able to see this creepy lady when he's looking through the viewfinder, and she seems to get closer every time he does. So this idea of peering through a tiny eye-shaped hole into a system of reflecting mirrors is creepy, and I'm sure that's why everybody's switching to mirrorless these days. We're all fairly familiar with how creepy mirrors are, so I won't say too much more about it, but I do want to tell you about a dream I had one time, and it was the scariest dream I ever had. In this dream, I woke up in bed to a phone call. When I looked at the call display, it was from myself. Now, at the time, I had this giant closet mirror right beside my bed. I answered the call and I heard my own voice say, "When you see a mirror in a dream, don't look at your reflection." And the dream ended with me just like, the darkroom. The darkroom is typically a small, confined space that must be kept pitch black or otherwise bathed in an eerie red light. Already, this is like a spooky concept. The fact that they're usually small doesn't really help people who might have claustrophobic tendencies. Combine that with the activities that take place in a dark room, using enigmatic chemical processes to convert captured light into a permanent image. Watching a likeness of people or objects that existed in the past gradually materialize on a piece of paper in front of you. That is a bit spooky. No matter how logical the process, I can see why this concept can be used effectively to trigger our lizard brain fear responses. Watching slowly as shadows of things emerge from the developing image, an out-of-place figure, a dark spot, and the anticipation as it reveals itself. First as a suggestion of light, then a form filling in, and then in full, gruesome detail. This feeling of anticipation that is naturally present in the darkroom has been used in horror to great effect. There's an iconic darkroom scene in The Grudge when a man, bathed in red light, surrounded by darkened photos pinned to wires, watches as a photo develops and reveals a black, hair-like smear in the center of it that darkens quickly. Suddenly, the stain begins to move and grow, swelling past the borders of the image to fill the basin of developer with a grisly black ink. The surface of the ink begins to swell, and from it emerges the head and hands of a grotesque and pale figure. There's a very similar scene in Shutter. The tension is built as a character slowly approaches a sink in the darkroom which has been left on, and she peers down at her reflection in the darkened water, distorted because of the dark and red character of the lighting. Suddenly, in the dark basin, what looks like the top of a head bobs up ever so slightly, and she, taken aback, leaps back. The water in the basin begins to overflow, and with it, tendrils of hair and hands come across the basin. It's terrifying, but it's also like so specific. Like, why are we so terrified of women coming out of basins of water in our dark rooms? I don't know. There's a lot more examples of scary darkroom scenes, but because the darkroom is called the darkroom, anytime I look up like darkroom in horror, it's like, oh, you meant dark rooms. Here's a bunch of rooms that are dark and they're scary. And it's like, yes, dark rooms are scary, but I'm talking about dark rooms. And it was very difficult to separate the search results on Google, and I kind of gave up. So let's move on. I want to point out the difference between analog and digital photography in horror and how each has these unique properties that can be used to instill fear in different ways. So analog photos, obviously, are tangible. They can be found, held, and destroyed. Analog photos can be further divided into two types: instant photos and photos that must be developed. And each of these two types has their own unique horror qualities as well. Instant cameras, especially Polaroids, make frequent appearances in horror media. In fact, I think it's exclusively Polaroids. I don't think I've ever seen like a Fujifilm Instax in a horror film. They have the same unique chemical processes that lend to the creepiness of the darkroom, except a Polaroid shows you what has just happened. And it may reveal something that is still with you, in the room with you as you peer curiously at the developing image. It's terrifying because you can see in the photo evidence that something absolutely exists, even if you can't see it. And not being able to see something that does apparently have a material form is pretty terrifying. Film that needs to be developed is spooky in a different way. For one thing, it takes you into the darkroom, but it also shows you what has been, something that may or may not have been visible to you at the time, and now that that moment has passed, there's no way to verify one way or the other. Was that dog there before? How did you not notice that woman at the funeral? Why is that child wearing such old-fashioned clothing? It's a clue from the past, but the moment has already slipped away, and the photo is the only remaining investigative tool. I took off the neck piece, I'm sorry, it was too itchy. Digital photographs, on the other hand, are unique in that they can be infinitely replicated and shared widely. And once they are shared with a wide enough audience, they can never really be destroyed. This is very scary in the case of cursed photographs. The whole, if you look at this image, you will be cursed. Well, if there's like 100,000 copies of the image out there, your chances of being cursed go up exponentially, and your chances of being able to destroy the image and end the curse are pretty darn low. So that gets pretty tricky and pretty spooky. You can burn a Polaroid to end the curse, but how do you destroy a JPEG? There's also something to be said for the difference in quality between analog photos and digital photos. Often in horror media, apparitions that appear in Polaroids or on film will be blurry and difficult to read, disguised among the light leaks in film grain and lending some uncertainty to the image. It sure looks like a ghost, but you don't know for sure, and it can't be, so it's probably just a smear on the lens or some quirk of the development process. There's some plausible deniability with these apparitions in analog photos. Apparitions in digital photographs, however, usually are crystal clear, and so in horror they tend to be less overtly ghostly and more just out of place. Unsettling. All right, we're finally into this part that I've been kind of alluding to a little bit, and we're going to talk about the photograph. We are going to talk about 4 common tropes for how the photograph is used. Now, tvtropes.org gave me 3 of these. They gave me Foreboding Photos, Spectral Snaps, and Cursed Images, and I would also like to add time-sensitive photos as an additional trope for how photographs are used in horror. So spectral snaps are like the classic, it's a picture of a ghost. Foreboding photos are photos that tell the future, or indicate that there are certain events to come. Cursed images are photos that actively curse the victim, causing unfortunate events to befall the subject or whoever looks at the photo. I'm going to also include cursed cameras in this section because that's a pretty common trope as well, and I just didn't know where else to talk about it. And finally, there's time-sensitive photos in which a creature or demon or something gets closer to the viewer with every image taken. So take one photograph and it's way over there, and then another photograph and it's a bit closer. That is a very common trope, and we will have fun talking about that at the end. Spectral snaps. So this is probably the most common use of photography in horror. It makes an appearance even in movies that otherwise don't reference photography or cameras at all. And basically it's when a photo captures or reveals something that is invisible to the naked eye. This one goes right back to the groundwork laid by charlatan spirit photographers in the 1800s, and this idea that the camera can pick up on certain beings and entities that the human eye cannot. In Junji Ito's iconic horror manga, Photograph, students commission this young photographer to take photos of their classmates who they have crushes on so that they can put these photos up in their locker. She's commissioned to take a photo of the beautiful and charismatic new girl, Tomi, but when she does, the photos are developed with horrifying, twisted deformations indicating that something's going on with Tomi, and it ain't normal. In the 2004 film Shutter, a professional photographer's photos show that he and his friends are being haunted by something. In The Sixth Sense, every photo of Cole, you know, the I See Dead People kid, has a spirit orb in it. indicating that he is perpetually surrounded by ghosts. Of all the tropes I talk about today, this one is the one that people literally believe. I don't think that anybody actually believes that there's a creature trapped in a mirror or that a photo can tell the future, but a lot of people believe that you might see a ghost in a photograph, so maybe this one's the scariest, or maybe it's just the most common. Next, we have foreboding photos. In every example of this trope that I could find, it is predicting a person's death. So in the iconic horror film, The Omen, every single photo Jennings takes has some hint of how the subject in the photo is going to die by Satan's influence. And these photos are the titular omens. In the equally iconic film, The Ring, when you watch this videotape, you die in 7 days, and once somebody has seen the videotape, every photo of them will appear with a blurred out face, indicating that they are not long for this earth. In the 2017 film, Camera Obscura, a veteran war photographer is gifted an antique camera which produces pictures that predict imminent deaths in the locations that he photographs. This also seems very similar to the plot of the 2019 film Polaroid, which also features a vintage camera that produces pictures of imminent deaths. But in Polaroid, the camera is less a predictor of death and more a weapon or a vessel for death, since the act of photographing somebody is correlated with their premature demise. Personally, I do find this trope the least scary way that photography is used, just because it doesn't really activate any instinctual fears that I can easily recognize, at least. No part of my evolutionary biology tells me to be afraid of images that predict the future. I'm not afraid of crystal balls or tarot cards either, so I don't know about this one. But what I am scared of is cursed images. A cursed image is typically a photograph of something creepy that literally contains that creepy thing. It's not just a representation of evil, but a vessel for it. This comes from a very literal interpretation of capturing an image. You're actually capturing something in that image beyond just the light that's reflecting off of the subject. I think this idea really does tie back to the idea of photographs stealing souls, and also the idea of a mirror being a gateway to another world. More generally, we also see the creatures trapped in small objects trope very often in horror, whether it's a demon trapped in like a doll or a locket or a mirror, or all of evil trapped in a box, or a ghost trapped in a photograph. Sometimes destroying the photograph brings about the end of the curse, but other times it unleashes that which is trapped inside. Probably the most iconic cursed image in recent memory is Smile Dog. I don't know, this terrified me as a kid. I was worried that it was true. Basically, it's this creepy picture of a dog, and the dog is a demon. And after looking at this image, according to legend, or according to this one creepypasta story, you will be visited by this dog in your dreams, and it will simply tell you to spread the word. You will then be compelled to share this image with as many people as possible. And the demon grows stronger every time somebody gazes upon it. Eventually, it'll get strong enough to come out of the photograph and eat us all and terrorize the world, I guess. I don't know. And this is also a great example of how the unique properties of a digital image add sort of a unique quality of terror, because Smile Dog's out there. You can't get rid of this JPEG. It's on a million sites, it's in a million places. You might avoid coming across it, but it's there, and it will always be there. And if it's cursed, oh my god, are we screwed. Another famous creepypasta is called The Girl in the Photograph, in which a young boy finds a photograph of a girl holding up a peace sign. And apparently she's so beautiful that he takes the photograph home and puts it on his bedside. That night, he awakes to a girl rapping on his window. He thinks it's her, so he goes to follow her, follows her across the road, and immediately gets hit by a car. The next morning, a neighbor finds the photograph lying on the ground next to the dead boy, and the girl is holding up 3 fingers. There's also a video game called Fatal Frame that is based on the idea of using a camera to detect and banish ghosts. So the game contains a special occult-made camera that steals vitality and life force from the ghost every time its photograph is taken. I think this is an interesting parallel to the idea that entities can be physically captured within photographs, and a good callback to the idea that photographs can steal souls. Finally, I want to talk about time-sensitive photos. You've seen this before. There's a smudge or smear in the background of a photo. What is that? You're not quite sure. But every time you take another photo of a certain place or subject or with a certain camera, The smudge grows closer, coalescing into something sinister. The only way you can see the creature is by taking photos, but it grows nearer and nearer every time you do. In the 2013 movie Insidious, there's a scene where the mother of one of the characters shows her adult son a series of photographs that were taken of him as a child, depicting an old woman who gradually gets closer and closer with each photograph until finally, the most recent photo is her reaching towards him. At the end of the movie, somebody takes his photograph, only for him to suddenly go nuts and strangle the photographer. When the photograph is developed, it's discovered that the old woman has now possessed him and now appears in his place. And that was one photograph too many. In The Devil's Messenger, the character Donald takes a photo of a beautiful girl who he then assaults and murders. When he develops the photo, he sees her standing on a path by his house. Every time he looks at the photo, she seems to grow closer, until her face fills the entire frame. Frenzied, he rips it up, only to find that now her body is lying in the same position on his studio floor as it was when she was murdered. She then strangles him. Good riddance. In the Stephen King story, The Sun Dog, a cursed Polaroid camera would capture images of the same vicious, snarling, malevolent dog that would progressively approach the viewer with each photo. Eventually, the dog does escape the photographs, but is immediately recaptured when somebody takes its picture. There's also this short film, White Void, which, oh my god, I found this so scary. I don't know why I found this so scary. I mean, I do. It's because I do this every day, and it's a totally unscary environment, and now somebody has made it scary, but oh my god, go watch it, it's good, it's in the sources. White Void is about a photographer who is snapping photos of a model just in a professional studio. There's people everywhere, there's makeup artists, there's production team. He realizes that in the split second between the flash firing and the mirror flipping up, there's something there. And it's not appearing in any of the photographs, but each time the mirror flips up and the flash fires, he sees it get a little bit closer, a little bit closer. Everybody's looking at him like, what's wrong, dude? And then it ends in a way that I'm not gonna tell you because you gotta go watch it, but it's very scary. But this was an interesting one because it kind of combines the fear of the flash, the fear of the viewfinder, the fear of the mirror flipping up, and also this idea of a time-sensitive photograph where something approaches you every time you look at it. Honestly, it's worth a watch. I found this one super creepy. And that is all the examples of how photography is used in horror that I wanted to talk to you about today. I didn't write an outro for this video. So hopefully you enjoyed all of the research that I put into it. You can leave a like, you can leave a comment down in the description if you liked the video or if you loved my beautiful costume. You can subscribe for a new video and stay tuned for next week. I will be going away to Montreal, so you will have some Montreal themed content in the near future. Thank you guys, take care, stay sharp, stay spooky, and don't forget to keep shooting. Bye guys.